In recent months, I've been subjected to severe and unacceptable pressure, including threats to disseminate false allegations of domestic abuse unless financial demands were met.
All right, so here's what's happening right now in the UFC. Two absolutely massive developments just dropped that could completely change everything we thought we knew about the landscape. Alex Pereira just obliterated any chance of those White House fight discussions moving forward, like completely wiped them off the map. But that's not even the wildest part of this story.
You can understand even more so why he would want to step away and not focus on fighting or defending his title, because obviously there's a lot going on. It's extremely sad. It's, I feel for everyone involved. I feel for his family. I feel for his kids. It's,
While all this is going down, Ilia Topuria drops some statements that have everyone genuinely questioning what comes next for him in the octagon. These aren't subtle hints we're talking about here. These are flat-out declarations that got the entire MMA world second-guessing everything. And when it comes to this whole mess that's developing, Ariel Helwani stepped up with a take that honestly makes perfect sense. He's saying, look, if Ilia Topuria has walked away from fighting temporarily because of everything happening in his personal world, that's totally reasonable. Helwani's calling the entire thing legitimately heartbreaking, sending support to Topuria's family through whatever they're dealing with, and basically telling everyone to pump the brakes and let this play out naturally instead of rushing to any major decisions.
the first quarter that you'll fight in January. When would you like to fight? When you feel it's time to return? Well, Ilia says, as I've communicated, I'm going through some personal problems. I do not have an exact date when everything will be fixed. I hope that as soon as possible.
So we're in complete limbo mode right now, and honestly, nobody knows what direction this goes. Ilia came forward and explained he's wrestling with some major personal stuff at the moment. He's being completely honest that there's no definitive timeline for his return to competition. His plan is simple. Once he gets his personal business completely sorted out and handled the right way, he absolutely wants to be back in that cage as fast as possible. Fighting remains his life and his calling. But right here, right now, everything has to center around fixing what's broken outside the sport, with his family situation and personal matters. You've got to admire someone putting it all on the line like that, being transparent about priorities, even when it means potentially sacrificing championship momentum. And ultimately, what Ilia wants is total clarity for the fans and the public, not leaving them in the dark to create their own theories and rumors.
Ilia says, as I've communicated, I'm going through some personal problems. I do not have an exact date when everything will be fixed. I hope that as soon as possible, as soon as it is solved, I will be ready to go back. In the octagon, I prioritize at this time the welfare of my family, of my children, my own. So as soon as everything is solved, I will be back to the octagon to give it the show that everyone deserves.
When the moment feels right, that's when I'll step back into competition. That's how Ilia wrapped up his explanation. But here's the key thing everyone needs to grasp. He went out of his way to make it obvious that stepping back from competition right now has absolutely nothing to do with losing his hunger or suddenly becoming intimidated by the level of competition waiting for him. This definitely isn't a fighter getting scared or starting to doubt his abilities. Absolutely not. This comes down to handling what actually matters most in life. His family and the personal crisis demanding his attention right now. He drives this point home hard. The fight game will always exist. That octagon stays put, but family emergencies and personal disasters have to take priority in this exact moment. When those urgent problems get completely handled and put to bed, that's his target for coming back. And not just coming back, but coming back completely locked in, mentally sharp, prepared to fight at the championship level fans know him for, and ready to put on the kind of crushing performances that earned him the belt originally.
Make that interim belt the actual belt if he's not going to come back anytime soon. I think I don't think that they're going to be forced to do that for the January event. We'll see what kind of timeline he's on, how long this is going to play out. But if it's by next summer, perhaps they make that call. And perhaps that's why a guy like Armin doesn't seem too bothered by what's going on. These things can play out in many different ways, and you're on the outside and then you're on the inside, and everything changes in an instant.
What's really fascinating here from a business perspective is this. Olwani points out that this whole situation might eventually put the UFC in a really tough spot if things drag out indefinitely without any resolution. He's not predicting any dramatic moves happening immediately in January or anything crazy like that, but he does float something pretty major. If Ilia stays on the shelf deep into the following year, we're talking extended periods of complete inactivity. The organization might seriously look at promoting that interim championship to full undisputed status. That's massive, because it basically equals stripping Ilia without technically calling it a stripping. Olwani also brings up this excellent observation that contenders like Ivleov and the rest aren't losing sleep over this uncertainty, and the reason makes total sense. They know that championship situations in mixed martial arts can flip entirely in a heartbeat, literally from one fighter decision, one unexpected injury, one scheduling delay, and boom, the entire hierarchy gets turned upside down, and suddenly who's getting the next title opportunity becomes a completely different conversation. These fighters are keeping themselves prepared and seeing how everything shakes out. The big unknown hanging over everything is, will the UFC eventually choose to proceed without Ilia if this situation continues with no end in sight?
My belief through the headlines is that Ilia was walking away from the UFC championship belt, thus elevating Justin Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett to undisputed title. Now, once I dug into this, I can't quite recall why I thought it in the first place. I mean, once I dug into it, there was nothing in the article that said that Paddy and Justin was going to be undisputed, or that the UFC was accepting, or that Ilia was surrendering a belt back.
On the other hand, Chael Sonnen jumped in with a totally different angle on this whole development, arguing that those original news reports about Ilia were actually pretty sensationalized and missed the real story. He went deeper and explained that when he actually studied the details of what was reported and looked beyond the clickbait headlines, there was definitely no solid evidence that Ilia Topuria was officially giving up the championship or stepping down permanently as featherweight king. Based on Chael's analysis of the situation, nothing in the legitimate reporting, when you actually read it thoroughly, indicated that the UFC had formally received any kind of title relinquishment from Ilia, or that fighters like Ivleov and Paddy Pimblett were suddenly getting bumped up to undisputed title contention. This was just a classic case of rumors and wild theories getting way out in front of what was actually happening on the record, which is pretty standard in MMA journalism whenever major news drops.
The story is that this made headlines for something that we were already told a couple of weeks ago, and there is no escalation from that, meaning Ilia Topuria is not vanquishing or having stripped from him the title. It actually, all of these articles going around, all of these stories you're going around, you're hearing about Ilia Topuria have no direct tying to Paddy the Baddy and Justin Gaethje. I get where this is confusing, and I even asked Daniel that. I said, hey man, what am I missing?
Sonnen also threw out something thought-provoking about where the sport sits right now. He mentioned that while a potential fight like Ilia versus Islam Makhachev might not seem absolutely earth-shattering on the surface to mainstream audiences, the truth about the current landscape is that the sport really doesn't have tons of legitimate mega fights sitting there right now that capture widespread attention outside the hardcore fan base. He explained that diehard fans are completely invested in the action and love following fighter development. But when you pull back and examine crossover potential, there are honestly very few marquee possibilities that break through to general sports coverage. Which is precisely why concepts like John Jones versus Alex Pereira suddenly become so incredibly attractive and create so much excitement by comparison. Those represent the rare fights that go beyond the sport and pull in viewers who normally ignore MMA completely.
So I start reading these articles. I start going through them all. I'm going, man, these headlines are very misleading. Let me get to the bottom of it. And Ilia does at some point make that statement, which is, I knew that this was going to come out. I thought staying quiet was a way to deal with it. But I've now learned when you're quiet in the world of PR, it gives fuel to flames of false narratives. So I'm going to come out and I'm going to let you know that I am expecting sooner or later an accusation to be made about domestic violence.
Chael expanded on his position, breaking down that after he actually took time and went through the complete articles word by word, rather than just responding to sensational headlines, it became totally obvious that the headlines were spinning the narrative and manufacturing drama that wasn't actually supported by facts. From Chael's interpretation of what happened, Ilia eventually stepped up and clarified his motivation for going public, explaining that staying completely quiet about the accusations would have just let bogus stories multiply and spread like wildfire across social platforms and MMA discussion boards. Ilia argued that he decided to speak directly and confront things head-on because he completely anticipates more accusations to emerge and persist no matter what approach he takes. And he refused to let lies and distorted versions of reality run wild while he stayed silent and allowed others to shape the story about his personal life.
I want to get Ilia in Islam, and I get that that's not a huge fight. I get it, but there's not a lot of huge fights out there. That's the other part that's really hard to swallow. Like, we've got a sport and a product that we really like, and it comes to us in a beautiful way, and we're along for the ride, but there's not a lot of really big matches out there. This Jones and Pierre business sounds like a really great idea.
Taking his analysis even further and getting into the specifics of the situation, Sonnen pointed out that while a potential matchup like Ilia versus Islam might not strike people as this incredible once-in-a-lifetime super fight on its face to casual sports fans, the reality when you survey the current UFC roster is that the organization legitimately doesn't have massive amounts of true blockbuster possibilities available at this moment that would attract millions of mainstream viewers. He stressed that dedicated fans are completely satisfied with the product. They're emotionally connected to fighter journeys and career progressions, but when you step back and consider mass market appeal, there are genuinely limited big-name options that create major media coverage, which is exactly why fantasies like John Jones versus Alex Pereira suddenly seem so compelling and generate so much buzz in contrast. Those are the exceptional matchups that transcend mixed martial arts and get people who never watch combat sports to pay attention.
Ilia Topuria announced that he's going to be taking some time away from the fight game to deal with some personal issues, and no one really knew the full extent of those personal issues, but now we do. Ilia Topuria has released a statement to Twitter, and it's not looking good for Ilia Topuria whatsoever. This is going to be a rough next couple of months, to say the least. I don't know how long this situation's going to go on for, but basically the gist of it is, before we read the entire thing, there's abuse allegations being made against Ilia Topuria. Of course, there's a child involved in the split between him and his partner, so that's going to come into play as well when it comes to custody and a custody battle going down. He says he's being blackmailed and it's all a lie, and he's got evidence and documents to support this that he's going to be submitting to the court. So if that's true, this should be over reasonably quickly, but we know how these things get dragged out.
At the same time, YouTuber MMA Guru also weighed in and offered her analysis on this developing story about Ilia's personal drama. Guru explains that the circumstances around Ilia are incredibly serious from both legal and personal angles, and very much likely to completely dominate his fighting career for months ahead, potentially much longer than people realize. She took care to break down that while Ilia publicly rejects the charges against him and maintains that he's being extorted with evidence that he intends to present to legal authorities to demonstrate his innocence, the inclusion of abuse accusations and a minor in this controversy makes everything infinitely more complex than your typical legal conflict. Even if he's being completely honest and the charges prove to be fabricated, she points out that court cases like this, particularly those involving domestic issues and children, almost never get resolved rapidly through the justice system. This suggests that the coming months at absolute minimum are going to be incredibly chaotic and challenging, both personally for him and his loved ones, and professionally for his championship status and public reputation.
Through it, I'm going to try and be objective here based on the information we have. I kind of knew this was the situation when Ilia first announced that he was going to be stepping away. I'll mention that at some point in this video. Bryce Mitchell has immediately weighed in on the situation aggressively, had a lot of harsh words for Ilia Topuria. Early doors on the whole situation, but Bryce Mitchell has massively condemned Ilia Topuria and gone after him, and he's angling. I guess he's pushing now for a fight with Alejandro Topuria and said he's down to fight him. They're both in the same weight class now at bantamweight, so
YouTuber MMA Guru came back around and reinforced that the circumstances surrounding Ilia are legitimately grave and might completely eclipse his fighting career for an extended period. While he's publicly disputing the accusations and insists he's being blackmailed and possesses evidence to clear himself, the fact that abuse allegations and a child are involved makes the whole situation unbelievably complicated from every possible perspective, legal and media relations. She highlighted that legal fights like this
especially those touching on family court, and accusations of this severity almost never wrap up quickly through official channels, which suggests the upcoming months are almost certainly going to be incredibly unstable for Ilia, both on a personal level as he navigates his family crisis and professionally as the UFC and supporters wait to discover what develops with his championship and future.
Ilia Topuria's official statement, he comes out with this, gets ahead of the stories, gets ahead of the news before they break it down or before we randomly find out about it as they're going through the court situation. And this is it. Over the past several weeks, I have made the difficult decision to temporarily step away from defending my title. This was not a decision I took lightly. However, when circumstances arise that threaten your personal integrity, your family, and your reputation, there comes a point where you must address them directly.
Ilia also put out a public statement explaining that he's temporarily walking away from title defenses, and he really emphasized the logic behind this choice. He broke down that when your personal character, your family's safety, and your complete reputation are on the line, you absolutely have to tackle the problem head-on, and correctly, not attempt to balance it with training schedules and competition. He stated very directly that he will completely participate with the legal proceedings as they develop, whatever that requires, and regardless of duration, and he's totally certain that the facts of the situation will surface when everything gets properly reviewed by the relevant authorities and court system.
This is a horrible situation. Bryce Mitchell immediately weighed in, and he's talking mad shit about Ilia Topuria. Let's let it play.
Well, I got something for you, bitch. It's called the Wife Beater Special. That's right, I got my wife beater on for Ilia Topuria. That bitch puts his hands on a woman. You know, I grew up without a dad. You know, never seen my dad, never will see my dad. And you know what? I'd rather not see my dad than have my dad there beating on my mom. Let me tell you something, that'll get you killed around these parts, son.
Bryce is going off. Bryce is right in at the deep end. Going off on Ilia Topuria. And people are pulling the MMA Guru special and posting pictures of him and John Jones. But this is all Bryce Mitchell needed to see. Okay? And off he goes.
MMA Guru wraps up her perspective on this, pointing out that Bryce Mitchell's public response to the Ilia controversy really demonstrates just how emotionally intense the whole situation has gotten throughout the MMA community and among fighters in his circle. She observes that while some of the commentary you're seeing online stems from authentic worry for Ilia and his family's situation, other reactions are obviously just driven by the drama itself and people wanting to insert themselves into the discussion. She expects that the online firestorm around Ilia and his personal troubles is almost definitely going to keep building and changing until more solid details come out from the court process or until Ilia himself offers more information about what's really going on.
Topuria's mother wrote, "The best son, the most humane person I know. Only the Lord knows how many people's futures depend on you and how hard you work for them. Everything will be fine, and most importantly, no one can take your peace away. May God bless you, my child." Topuria's aunt said, "Love, Ilia. First of all, you are big, kind, and have a loving heart, aunt." Topuria's longtime coach, Javi Clement, said, "Always with you, brother."
Now switching gears to Ilia Topuria. Meanwhile, Ilia's mother and his veteran coach both stepped forward publicly and voiced strong support for him, offering encouragement and backing him up during this incredibly challenging, ongoing situation that's playing out in his personal world.
In recent months, I have been subjected to severe and unacceptable pressure, including threats to disseminate false allegations of domestic abuse unless financial demands were met. These allegations are entirely unfounded. The truth of the matter is not an opinion. It is a matter of evidence. So basically saying, and he's not overtly saying it's his wife, but it has to be. He's basically saying, I am being told that they're going to tell the world I hit her unless I pay them money. And so now it's a very dicey situation.
I want to know where he's going to get the evidence to prove he didn't do it. That's the only thing. And look, and I'm on his side in this situation until otherwise proven that he's guilty. And I'm going to always go, and that's just kind of my letter of the law. Is like, let's see how the court plays out. Let's see exactly what evidence comes to fruition. I don't want to put my foot in my mouth, which I do all the time. But in this situation, this is very serious.
In the same way, Sean O'Malley shared his thoughts and showed real compassion for what Ilia's going through, recognizing how unbelievably tough it has to be managing these kinds of major personal and legal problems while you're expected to be getting ready mentally and physically for a championship bout. He pointed out that bringing kids into any personal dispute makes it exponentially harder and more emotionally exhausting to handle, and he characterized the whole set of circumstances as truly unfortunate for Ilia, both as a competitor and as a human being. Sean O'Malley said directly, "I genuinely feel terrible for him because that's brutal when you're dealing with that kind of serious personal chaos and legal drama. You absolutely don't want to be in training camp, simultaneously trying to get your body and mind ready for a fight. I really feel for him having to work through this, and when children get involved in any personal situation, that's what makes it so incredibly difficult to process emotionally. It's really sad for him, and I hope everything works out." In totally unrelated news, Ilia Topuria also made sure to compliment Paddy Pimblett as an intelligent and exciting fighter in competition, publicly recognizing that while they might have their conflicts and tension on social platforms, he still acknowledges Paddy's abilities as an athlete. He mentions that Paddy made what he views as an error with a post about Georgia that went too far. But Ilia stresses that everybody learns and develops from their errors, and he's not planning to hate him forever. Ilia also said that he views Paddy as someone who, on a personal human level, gets what it's like to handle family troubles and personal struggles outside of fighting. Ilia Topuria stated clearly, "Paddy Pimblett is an intelligent fighter when you see him perform. Despite our personal conflicts and whatever problems we have on social media, I always maintain that Paddy seems like a really exciting person who's performed his role excellently inside the cage. He screwed up with that post he made about Georgia, but we all grow from our errors as people. I see him as someone who fundamentally gets family issues and what that's like to experience." Shifting to another viewpoint, YouTuber Bad Takes also shared his opinion on this discussion in a conversation with Josh Thompson, speaking specifically about Ilia's circumstances and describing it as extremely grave with genuine legal consequences. He said he completely supports allowing the legal system its appropriate time and letting it run its course entirely before anyone reaches final conclusions. He stressed heavily that the reality of what occurred should be decided by the courts and the justice system, not by social media theories and emotional reactions, and that it's absolutely essential for everyone to avoid jumping to conclusions or assuming guilt or innocence until real evidence appears and gets reviewed properly by officials. Leave your opinions down in the comments, because I'm really curious what you're all thinking about this situation. What's your reaction to Alex Pereira confirming that the White House possibility is now totally dead and not moving forward? Does that shift how you see his next steps in the UFC and what direction he should go? And on the other side of this whole thing, with Alex looking solid and confident at the top of his weight class, Ilia Topuria's future just became way more questionable and uncertain following his recent public statements and all the serious accusations swirling around his personal world. Are we witnessing right now one champion strengthen his position and lock down his spot in MMA history, while another fighter's career trajectory completely hits a wall during what should be his greatest moment? Or is this just another crazy turn in the never-ending story of MMA business and controversy that we've all become familiar with? Drop your thoughts on all this, tell us what you think comes next, and make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for all the newest fight updates, instant reactions to breaking developments, and detailed analysis of everything going on in the MMA universe.